I caught my wife's stepdad sniffing her underwear on the baby monitor, and this one video changed everything. I'm writing this from a hotel room because I can't be in my house right now, and I need to get this out before I lose my mind. I'm 33, been married to my wife Cassidy for 4 years, together for 6. We have a 9-month-old daughter named Bryn. Cassidy's mom, Laura, married her stepdad, Frank, about 12 years ago when Cassidy was in college. Frank seemed like a decent guy, quiet, worked in IT, never caused problems. I never had strong feelings about him either way. Cassidy's relationship with Frank has always been polite, but not particularly close. He wasn't a father figure, more like her mom's husband who happened to be around for family stuff. Her biological dad died when she was 8, so she'd already gone through most of her childhood without a father by the time Frank came into the picture. The relevant context is that Lauren and Frank have been staying with us for the past 3 weeks. They're between houses because they sold their place in Flagstaff and are waiting for their new condo in Scottsdale to close escrow. The timing was supposed to work out perfectly, but the closing got delayed twice. Having them here has been fine, a little cramped but manageable. Lauren helps with Bryn during the day while Cassidy and I work. Frank mostly keeps to himself in the guest room or goes for long walks. We have a baby monitor in Bryn's room, one of those fancy ones with a camera that connects to an app on our phones. The camera has pretty wide coverage of the room and part of the hallway outside when the door is open. 3 days ago, I was at work reviewing footage from the night before because Bryn had been fussy and I wanted to see if I could figure out what was waking her up. The app saves clips when it detects motion. I was scrolling through the overnight clips when I saw one from around 2 in the morning that showed movement in the hallway outside Bryn's room. I clicked on it thinking maybe Cassidy had gotten up to check on her. It wasn't Cassidy. It was Frank, standing in the hallway right outside our bedroom door. Our bedroom is directly across from Bryn's room, so the monitor catches part of our doorway when both doors are open. In the video, Frank was standing there holding something white in his hands. He brought it up to his face. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. He was holding a pair of underwear, Cassidy's underwear, and he was smelling them. I felt like I was going to throw up. I watched the 20-second clip 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding what I was seeing. There was no misunderstanding. Frank had taken my wife's underwear from somewhere, probably our bedroom or the laundry, and was standing in the hallway in the middle of the night smelling them. After about 20 seconds in the video, he walked back down the hallway toward the guest room, still holding the underwear. I sat in my car in the parking lot at work trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't call Cassidy because she was in back-to-back meetings all morning. I couldn't go home because I'd already used all my sick days when Bryn had RSV last month. I sent the video clip to my personal email, so I'd have it saved outside the app. Then I just sat there feeling sick. When Cassidy finally called me on her lunch break, I told her I needed to talk to her about something urgent, but not over the phone. She could tell something was wrong and offered to leave work early, but I told her to finish her day, that we'd talk when we were both home. The rest of my day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, kept thinking about Frank being in our house around Cassidy and Bryn, kept thinking about how long this might have been going on. I got home before Cassidy. Lauren was in the living room with Bryn. Frank was allegedly out on one of his walks. I couldn't even look at Lauren without feeling rage that she'd brought this person into our lives. When Cassidy got home, I asked Lauren if she could watch Bryn for a bit longer because we needed to talk. She said, of course, and I took Cassidy into our bedroom and locked the door. I pulled up the video on my phone and handed it to her without explaining what she was about to see. I watched her face as she watched the clip, confusion, then recognition, then this look of complete horror. She watched it twice. Then she looked at me and said, "Are you sure that's what he's doing?" I said, "What else could he possibly be doing with your underwear at 2 in the morning in the hallway outside her bedroom?" She didn't have an answer. She just started crying. We sat there for probably 20 minutes. Cassidy kept saying she felt violated and disgusted, and she couldn't believe this was happening. She asked how long I thought it had been going on. I said I had no idea, but we needed to check if there were other clips. We spent an hour going through saved footage from the past 3 weeks, found 2 other instances, both in the middle of the night, both showing Frank in the hallway, holding what appeared to be clothing and bringing it to his face. Cassidy looked like she was going to be sick. She said we needed to tell her mom immediately and get them out of our house. I said we should call the police first, that what Frank was doing was criminal. Cassidy hesitated, said she wanted him gone, and she wanted her mom to know what kind of person she'd married, but she wasn't sure about involving police, that it would blow up her mom's entire life. I told her Frank had violated our home and our privacy and probably been doing this for weeks, that we had evidence that he needed to face consequences. Cassidy started crying harder, said she needed to think that this was her family and it was more complicated than just calling the cops. I was frustrated, but I understood. This was her stepdad, her mom's husband, someone who'd been in her life for over a decade. Even though what he'd done was unforgivable, I got why she needed time to process. We agreed we'd confront him together when he got back from his walk, that we'd show him the videos and tell him he needed to leave our house immediately. Then we'd figure out next steps. Frank got back around 6. Lauren was still watching Bryn in the living room. Cassidy asked Frank if they could talk to him privately in the guest room. The three of us went in, and Cassidy closed the door. Frank looked confused, asked if everything was okay. Cassidy pulled up the video on her phone and showed it to him. I watched Frank's face go pale. He started to say something, but Cassidy cut him off. She said, "We have 3 videos of you taking my underwear and smelling it in the middle of the night. We want you out of our house in the next hour. You can tell Mom whatever you want, but you're leaving." Frank sat down on the bed. He looked like he might pass out. Then he started crying. He said he was sorry, that he had a problem, that he'd been struggling with this compulsion for years, and he'd been in therapy for it before, but stopped going, that he knew it was wrong, but he couldn't help himself. I asked how long he'd been doing this in our house. He said since the second night they'd been staying with us, 3 weeks. Cassidy asked if he'd ever done anything like this with her clothes before they moved in with us. Long pause. Then Frank said yes, that when they'd visited us over the years, he'd sometimes taken things, that he'd been doing it since Cassidy and I gotten married. For years. This had been going on for 4 years. Cassidy's face went white. She told Frank to get out, that she didn't want to hear another word from him. Just pack his stuff and leave. Frank tried to apologize again, but I told him if he wasn't gone in 1 hour, I was calling the police and showing them the videos. He nodded and started packing. We left the room, and Cassidy went to tell her mom. I stayed in the hallway to make sure Frank actually packed and didn't try to talk to anyone. I could hear Cassidy and Lauren in the living room. Cassidy's voice explaining what had happened. Then Lauren's voice, shocked and confused, asking to see the videos. Then screaming, Lauren screaming at Frank to get out of the house. Bryn started crying from all the noise. The next hour was chaos. Lauren crying, Frank crying, Cassidy trying to calm Bryn down. I just stood there making sure Frank actually left. He packed 2 suitcases and left without saying anything to anyone. Lauren was sitting on our couch, sobbing, saying she had no idea, that she'd never seen any signs of this, that she felt sick. Cassidy told her mom she could stay with us as long as she needed, but Frank was not welcome in our home ever again. Lauren said she understood, that she needed to figure out what to do, whether to stay married to someone who'd been violating her daughter's privacy for years. It's been 3 days since Frank left. Lauren is still staying in our guest room. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. She's called Frank several times demanding answers, but he apparently just keeps apologizing and saying he needs help. Cassidy has been a wreck. She keeps thinking about all the times Frank was in our house over the past 4 years. All the times he must have gone into our bedroom when we weren't looking. All the times he violated her privacy while pretending to be normal family. She's also angry at herself for not noticing, for not seeing signs. I keep telling her there's no way she could have known, but she's not hearing it. I'm angry that this happened in our home with our baby daughter here. Angry that someone we trusted was doing this the entire time. We haven't decided yet whether to report this to police. Cassidy is still processing. Lauren has begged us not to, saying Frank needs therapy, not criminal charges, that it would destroy what's left of their lives. I think he deserves to be reported, that this is a crime, and he's admitted to doing it for years. But it's Cassidy's family and ultimately her decision. What I do know is Frank is never allowed near our family again. Near Cassidy, near Bryn, near our home. I don't care if he gets therapy or medication or whatever. The trust is permanently destroyed. Lauren asked yesterday if we'd be willing to do family therapy with Frank present once he gets help. Cassidy said absolutely not, that she has no interest in sitting in a room with someone who violated her that way. I'm backing whatever Cassidy decides, but I'm also struggling with the fact that we have evidence of a crime and we're just sitting on it because it's family. I don't know what the right answer is here. Update. It's been 12 days since we kicked Frank out, and I'm updating because the situation has gotten significantly more complicated in ways I didn't anticipate. After my last post, Lauren stayed with us for 4 more days. She spent most of that time either crying or on the phone with Frank demanding explanations. From what Cassidy overheard, Frank kept insisting he had a compulsion he couldn't control, that he'd been fighting it for years, that he was ashamed. Lauren asked him point blank if he'd ever done anything like this before marrying her. He apparently admitted he had, that he'd had similar issues in a previous relationship, and that's part of why that relationship had ended. So Lauren had unknowingly married someone with a history of this behavior. She was devastated. On day 5, after Frank left, Lauren told us she was going to stay with her sister in Albuquerque for a while. She needed space from everyone to figure out what she wanted to do about her marriage. She asked if we'd be willing to send her the videos so she could show them to a therapist. Cassidy was hesitant, but eventually sent them. Lauren left that afternoon. For a few days after Lauren left, things were quiet. Cassidy and I tried to get back to normal routine with Bryn. We were both still processing everything, but at least we had our house back. Then 6 days ago, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was a woman who introduced herself as Nora. She said she was Frank's ex-wife for before he married Lauren. She said Frank had called her a few days ago and confessed what had happened with us. He told her he was finally getting help and wanted to apologize to her for similar behavior during their marriage. Nora said she'd been thinking about Frank's confession and decided she needed to reach out to us. She asked if I had a few minutes to talk. I said yes, and she told me a story that made my skin crawl. Nora and Frank had been married for 6 years. She said toward the end of their marriage, she'd started noticing her underwear going missing. At first, she thought she was losing things in the laundry. Then she started finding them in strange places in Frank's car, in his desk drawer at home. When she confronted him, he denied it at first, then eventually admitted he had a fetish he couldn't control. He promised to get therapy. According to Nora, Frank went to therapy for about 2 months and then quit. Said he was cured, but the behavior continued. She'd find her things in his possession. He'd make excuses. The final straw for Nora was when she discovered Frank had installed a hidden camera in their bathroom. He'd been recording her without her knowledge for months. She divorced him immediately and reported him to police, but the prosecutor had declined to press charges because of some technicality with how the evidence was obtained. Nora said she tried to warn people about Frank after the divorce, but he'd threatened to sue her for defamation. She backed off because she couldn't afford a legal battle. When Frank met Lauren a few years later, Nora said she'd considered reaching out to warn her, but decided it wasn't her place. She regretted that decision now. Nora told me she thought we should know Frank's history wasn't just a compulsion. It was a pattern of escalating behavior. Underwear, then hidden cameras. She had no idea what might come next. She also said she'd kept documentation from her divorce. Emails where Frank had admitted to the cameras. Police reports, even though they hadn't led to charges. She offered to send me everything if we were considering legal action. I thanked her and said I'd talk to Cassidy. When I told Cassidy about the call, she looked like she'd been punched. The idea that Frank had escalated to cameras with his previous wife made her paranoid about our own house. We spent an entire evening doing a sweep of our home, checked every room, every smoke detector, every outlet, every possible place a hidden camera could be installed. We didn't find anything, but Cassidy couldn't shake the fear that we'd missed something. She said we needed to call the police, that if Frank had a history of this escalating, we couldn't just let him walk away with a warning. I agreed. We called a non-emergency line and explained the situation. They sent an officer to our house to take a statement. We showed him the videos from the baby monitor, explained Frank's admission that he'd been doing this for 4 years. The officer said what Frank had done likely qualified as invasion of privacy at minimum. He'd file a report and forward it to detectives who handle these types of cases. He also suggested we contact a lawyer about getting a restraining order to make sure Frank couldn't come near our property or family. We contacted a lawyer the next day. She reviewed the videos and Frank's admission and said we had strong ground for a restraining order. She filed the paperwork. The hearing was yesterday. Frank showed up with his own lawyer. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His lawyer argued that Frank had already left our home voluntarily, had no intention of contacting us, and was seeking professional help, that a restraining order was unnecessary. Our lawyer presented the videos and explained Frank's history with Nora, argued that this was a pattern of escalating behavior and we needed legal protection. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. Frank has to stay at least 500 yards from our home, our workplaces, and Bryn's daycare. The order is in place for 1 year with possibility of extension. Frank didn't say anything during the hearing, but he looked at Cassidy at one point, and she said she could see tears in his eyes. I felt nothing, just wanted him legally barred from our lives. After the hearing, our lawyer told us the detective assigned to our case had contacted her. They wanted to interview us and were considering charges, possibly multiple counts of invasion of privacy. We have an interview scheduled for next week. Lauren called Cassidy that night. She'd heard about the restraining order from Frank. She was upset that we'd gone the legal route without telling her first. Cassidy told her mom we'd tried handling it privately, but after learning about Frank's history with Nora and the hidden cameras, we couldn't just let it go, that this was about protecting our family. Lauren said she understood, but she was filing for divorce, and this was all too much. She started crying and said her whole life had fallen apart. Cassidy felt terrible, but told her mom we had to do what was right for our safety, that we loved her and would support her through the divorce, but Frank needed to face consequences. Lauren said she needed space from all of us for a while, that she'd call when she was ready. That was 4 days ago. We haven't heard from her since. Cassidy is struggling with losing her mom on top of everything else. She feels like Frank destroyed multiple relationships, not just his own marriage. Meanwhile, I've been going through old photos and videos from the past 4 years, trying to see if there are any moments I missed, any signs that Frank was behaving inappropriately. I haven't found anything obvious. He was always good at hiding it. That's almost worse. Knowing someone can violate you repeatedly while maintaining a completely normal facade. Bryn is too young to understand any of this, but I keep thinking about the fact that this was happening while she was in our home, while we were supposed to be protecting her. We've scheduled a session with a therapist who specializes in family trauma. Cassidy needs help processing the violation and betrayal. I need help managing my anger. The detective interview is in 3 days. Our lawyer says to be prepared for this, to potentially go to trial if they file charges, that we might have to testify about what we saw and how Frank's behavior affected us. Part of me wants to see Frank prosecuted, wants there to be official consequences and a record, so he can't do this to another family. Part of me just wants it to be over, wants to move on and rebuild our sense of safety in our own home. Cassidy is firmly in the prosecute camp now. She says if we don't follow through, we're enabling him to keep doing this. She's right, but it doesn't make the process less exhausting. Final update. It's been 8 weeks since I found the first video, and I'm updating because there's finally some closure, though it came in a way none of us expected. After my last update, Cassidy and I met with the detective. We gave formal statements about what we'd witnessed on the baby monitor footage, Frank's admission that he'd been taking Cassidy's underwear for 4 years, and what we'd learned from Nora about his history. The detective said he was building a case and had already interviewed Frank. According to the detective, Frank had admitted to everything immediately and said he wasn't going to fight any charges. He wanted to plead guilty and get treatment. The detective also said they were investigating whether there might be additional victims. They'd contacted Nora about her case with the hidden camera and were looking into whether charges could be filed retroactively. That conversation happened 6 weeks ago. In the time since, things moved faster than we anticipated. The prosecutor filed 3 counts of invasion of privacy against Frank, one for each instance we captured on video, though the prosecutor told us the pattern of behavior over 4 years would factor into sentencing recommendations. Frank's lawyer contacted our lawyer 2 weeks after charges were filed. Frank wanted to accept a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to all counts in exchange for the prosecutor's recommendation of probation, mandatory therapy, and registration as a sex offender. Our lawyer explained that the sex offender registration was significant. Frank would have restrictions on where he could live and work. He'd be on the registry for at least 10 years, possibly longer, depending on how the judge classified his offense. Cassidy asked if we had any say in whether the plea deal was accepted. Our lawyer said we could provide a victim impact statement that would be considered during sentencing, but ultimately the decision to accept the plea was up to the prosecutor and Frank. The prosecutor called us a few days later. She said she was inclined to accept the plea because it guaranteed a conviction and sex offender registration without the uncertainty of a trial. She wanted to know how we felt about it. Cassidy said she wanted Frank to face consequences, but she also didn't want to go through a trial, having to testify about this publicly, having the videos potentially shown in court, reliving the violation over and over. I felt the same way. I wanted Frank held accountable, but I also wanted this to end. We told the prosecutor we were okay with the plea deal as long as the sex offender registration was part of it. The plea hearing was 2 weeks ago. Cassidy and I attended. Lauren did not. We hadn't heard from Lauren in over a month at that point. Cassidy had tried calling several times, but Lauren wasn't answering. Her sister in Albuquerque told Cassidy that Lauren was severely depressed and wasn't ready to talk to anyone. Frank appeared at the hearing looking completely defeated. He pled guilty to all 3 counts, didn't try to minimize what he'd done or make excuses. The judge asked if he understood the consequences of his plea, including sex offender registration. Frank said yes. Then the judge asked if we wanted to read our victim impact statement. Cassidy had written something, but decided at the last minute she didn't want to read it aloud in front of Frank. She submitted it in writing instead. I haven't read what she wrote. She said it was too personal to share even with me. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks out. We left the courthouse feeling strange. Not relieved exactly, just exhausted. Nora reached out to me again a few days after the plea hearing. She said the police had interviewed her about the hidden camera incident from her marriage to Frank. The prosecutor on our case was exploring whether they could charge Frank for that as well, but there were statute of limitations issues. Nora said even if they couldn't charge him for what he did to her, she was glad he was finally facing consequences. She thanked us for following through when she hadn't been able to. That conversation stayed with me, the idea that Frank had been getting away with this behavior for over a decade. How many times had he done this and never been caught? The sentencing hearing was last week. Frank got 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory sex offender therapy for the duration of his probation, and 15 years on the sex offender registry. The judge said Frank's pattern of behavior over multiple relationships showed this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, but a persistent violation of women's privacy and autonomy. that the lengthy registry period was necessary to protect potential future victims. Frank's lawyer tried to argue that 15 years was excessive given that Frank was seeking treatment and showing remorse. The judge shut that down immediately, said Frank had been seeking treatment on and off for years according to his own statements, and it clearly hadn't stopped the behavior. Cassidy and I sat in the courtroom listening to Frank get sentenced, and I felt this weird mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that there were real consequences, sadness that this was how Cassidy's family ended up. After the hearing, Frank's lawyer approached our lawyer in the hallway, said Frank wanted to apologize to us directly if we'd be willing to hear it. Cassidy said absolutely not, that she had no interest in anything Frank had to say. I agreed. An apology at this point meant nothing. We went home and tried to process what the sentencing meant going forward. Frank couldn't come near us because of the restraining order. He'd have to notify his neighbors about his sex offender status. His life was fundamentally changed. Good, he'd fundamentally changed our sense of safety and privacy. He deserved consequences that lasted. Lauren finally called Cassidy 3 days ago. She's still in Albuquerque. She's filed for divorce, and it should be final in a few months. She told Cassidy she was sorry for not being there, that she'd been paralyzed by shame and depression and hadn't known how to face us. Cassidy told her none of this was her fault, that Frank had lied to all of us. Lauren said she kept thinking about all the times Frank had been around Cassidy over the years, all the visits, all the holidays, wondering if he'd been doing this the entire time. Cassidy said probably yes, that we had to accept we'd never know the full extent of it. Lauren asked if Cassidy hated her for bringing Frank into her life. Cassidy said no, that she was hurt Lauren hadn't been there for her through this process, but she didn't blame her for Frank's actions. They talked for over an hour. Lauren said she was starting therapy and trying to figure out how to rebuild her life. She wanted to move back to Phoenix eventually and be closer to Cassidy and Bryn, but she needed more time. Cassidy told her to take whatever time she needed, that they'd figure out their relationship when Lauren was ready. After the call, Cassidy seemed lighter, like some weight had lifted knowing her mom didn't blame her and wanted to repair their relationship eventually. As for me and Cassidy, we're doing better. The therapy has helped. We've been working through the violation of trust, the paranoia about our home, the anger at someone we'd allowed into our lives for years. Our therapist has been helping Cassidy process the complicated grief of losing the version of her family she thought she had, the stepdad who seemed harmless, the intact marriage between her mom and Frank, the illusion of safety. She's also been dealing with guilt that took me by surprise. Guilt that she'd somehow invited this by being too friendly with Frank, by not setting clear boundaries, by not noticing sooner. I've told her 1,000 times none of this was her fault, but trauma doesn't respond to logic. The therapist has been more effective at helping Cassidy see that Frank's behavior was entirely his responsibility, that predators are good at hiding their actions, that there's nothing Cassidy could have done differently. We've also been working on reclaiming our home. We got rid of the guest bed Frank had slept in, replaced it with a desk and bookshelf, and turned that room into a home office. Rearranged our bedroom completely so it doesn't look the same as it did when Frank was violating our privacy. Small things, but they've helped. Bryn is thriving, completely unaware of any of this. She's crawling now, getting into everything. Watching her grow and develop has been a reminder of why we fought so hard to protect our family. We've also had conversations about what we'll tell her when she's older, whether we'll explain why she doesn't have a relationship with her grandmother's ex-husband, how much detail to share about what happened. Our therapist says we have years before those conversations are necessary, that we should focus on healing ourselves first. The baby monitor footage that started all of this has been turned over to police as evidence. We deleted it from our personal devices. Don't want those videos existing anywhere we might accidentally encounter them. We upgraded our security system, added cameras outside the house with better motion detection, changed all our locks even though Frank had never had keys. We needed the psychological reassurance that he couldn't access our home even if he wanted to. The restraining order has another 11 months on it. Our lawyer says we can petition to extend it before it expires, and she strongly recommends we do. Even with Frank on the sex offender registry and probation, legal barriers between him and our family provide additional protection. We'll definitely be extending it. I've thought a lot about Nora over the past few weeks, about how she tried to hold Frank accountable years ago and been shut down by a prosecutor who wouldn't file charges, how she lived with knowing Frank was out there potentially doing this to other women and feeling powerless to stop it. I understand now why she'd reached out to us, why she'd offered her documentation and support. She'd been waiting years for someone to successfully hold Frank accountable. I sent her an email after the sentencing, letting her know the outcome. She responded saying she'd cried when she read it, that she'd finally felt validated after all these years. She also said she'd been contacted by the prosecutor about possibly pursuing civil action against Frank for the hidden camera incident, even though criminal charges were barred by statute of limitations. She was considering it. I hope she does. Frank deserves to face consequences for everything he's done, not just what we caught on video. Cassidy and I have talked about whether we'd support Nora if she moves forward with a civil case, whether we'd be willing to testify about Frank's pattern of behavior if it helped her case. We agreed we would, that Frank had gotten away with this for too long with too many victims. As for Frank himself, I have no idea where he is or what he's doing. The terms of his probation mean he has to report his address to authorities and notify his neighbors of his sex offender status. Our lawyer says she'll alert us if Frank ever tries to move back to our area. Though given the restraining order and the fact that Lauren is divorcing him, there's no reason for him to return to Phoenix. I hope he's getting real help this time. Not for his sake, but for the sake of potential future victims, though I'm cynical about whether therapy will actually change someone who's been doing this for over a decade. The sex offender registry is public. Cassidy looked Frank up on it once, and then made me promise to never let her look again. She said seeing his photo and address and the description of his offenses made her feel sick. I looked a few times. Some morbid need to confirm he's really on there, that there are official consequences documented in a public system. He's listed as a Tier 2 offender, which means moderate risk, has to register for 15 years, has restrictions on where he can live in relation to schools and parks. Good. Lauren sent Cassidy photos last week from Albuquerque. She's lost weight and looks older, but she was smiling in the pictures. She'd started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. She said she was slowly rebuilding herself, that she'd joined a support group for people whose partners turn out to be different than they'd thought. She'd been surprised how many people had similar stories. She asked if she could visit in a few months, said she missed Bryn and wanted to see Cassidy in person. Cassidy said yes, but that we need to have clear conversations about boundaries first, that Lauren couldn't bring up Frank or ask us to forgive him or suggest we'd been too harsh. Lauren agreed, said she understood completely. I'm cautiously optimistic about Cassidy and Lauren rebuilding their relationship. They were close before all this, talked multiple times a week. Lauren had been an involved grandmother, even though Bryn was still so young. All of that got destroyed when Frank's behavior came to light. Not because of anything Lauren did, but because the betrayal was so entangled with her marriage that there was collateral damage. But people heal. Relationships can be rebuilt with effort and time and clear boundaries. My relationship with my own parents has been affected by this too, in ways I didn't expect. They've been more present, more involved with Bryn. My mom said seeing what we went through made her realize how much trust it takes to let people into your home and your family, that she didn't want to take our trust for granted. It's been a strange silver lining. My parents and I were never distant, but we're closer now. Cassidy's relationship with her biological father's side of the family has also strengthened. Her dad's brother and his wife have been checking in regularly, offering support. They'd always been around, but peripheral. Now, they're more central. Family configurations shift after trauma. Some relationships dissolve, others strengthen. New patterns emerge from the wreckage. We're 8 weeks out from the initial discovery, and life feels almost normal again most days. Then something will trigger the memory, a notification on the baby monitor app, Lauren calling, driving past the courthouse. And we're back in it for a moment. The violation, the anger, the betrayal. But those moments are getting less frequent, less consuming. Our therapist says that's how healing works. The trauma doesn't disappear, but it becomes integrated rather than overwhelming. You build a life around it that's bigger than the hurt. We're building that life, focusing on Bryn, on our marriage, on the family and friends who've supported us, on reclaiming the home and privacy that Frank violated. I don't know if we'll ever feel completely safe again in the way we did before. That naive trust that people are who they present themselves to be. But we're learning a different kind of safety, one built on awareness, boundaries, and a knowledge that we can protect ourselves and each other when threats emerge. Frank took something from us. That's undeniable, but he didn't destroy us. The marriage is stronger because we navigated this together. Our boundaries are clearer. Our awareness is sharper. We know what we'll tolerate and what we won't. And Frank has to live with the consequences of his actions for the next 15 years minimum. Has to register as a sex offender. Has to notify neighbors and employers. Has to live with the public record of what he did. That won't undo the harm, but it's something. Cassidy said something last week that stuck with me. She said she used to think the worst thing that could happen was discovering you'd been violated, but she'd learned the worst thing was discovering you'd been violated and doing nothing about it. We did something, we documented it, reported it, pursued legal action, made sure there were consequences. Not every victim can do that. The system doesn't always work. Sometimes there isn't enough evidence, or the process is too re-traumatizing, or the legal outcome doesn't match the harm. We were lucky in some ways. We had clear video evidence, a perpetrator who admitted guilt, a prosecutor who took it seriously, a judge who imposed meaningful consequences. Not everyone gets that, but we did, and Frank will carry the weight of what he did for a very long time. That has to be enough because it's all we can control. The rest is healing, rebuilding, moving forward. Protecting Bryn as she grows and making sure she knows she has parents who will fight for her safety no matter what. Creating a home that feels secure even after it was violated. Maintaining relationships with the people who stood by us and setting boundaries with those who couldn't. This isn't the ending I wanted 8 weeks ago when I first saw that video. I wanted it to have never happened, but it did happen, and we survived it, and we made sure there were consequences. That's going to have to be enough.